There were two of them. I guess that's where we should start. Nobody really knows how long they'd known each other, but in my mind, I've always pictured them as friends. Maybe they weren't, but I've always thought of them that way. One thing is certain, though, they had gotten themselves in trouble. Big trouble. The kind of trouble that gets you killed. And there they were, done, busted, no going back. Have you ever been there? I know I have, plenty of times. Now don't get me wrong, I've never hung on a cross. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, I found myself caught. I found myself in places that I shouldn't have been with no excuse. I found myself guilty. And they were guilty. And so there they hung on their crosses, breathing their last breaths. What we remember is the stuff of legendary biblical proportion. It's the linchpin of everything we think about when we think about salvation and freedom and forgiveness. It's big stuff, you know, the biggest. Today, you will be with me in paradise. But wait a minute, we've got to remember something. There were two. We like to remember the one who accepted the forgiveness. We like to remember that on that very day, he was in heaven. We like to identify with him in the story. We like to think that we are him and that he is us. Because everybody likes a storybook ending. But we've got to remember something. There were two. On that very day, right next to Jesus, hanging on the cross, was another guy. A different guy. Maybe he looked the same, maybe he sounded similar, maybe they were friends, maybe they had committed the very same sin, but he was different. And we don't really like to think about him as much, do we? He's a tough thought, that guy. He was angry, sure. I mean, who wouldn't be? He had heard so much about this guy that was hanging there next to him. He didn't want to be caught. He didn't want to be guilty. He didn't want to die. And so he cursed and he screamed and he hurled insults just like the crowd there that day. And in his moment of weakness and loss, he became everything we don't want to be. So we don't want to look at that part of the story. We don't want to remember something very important, that we can't just hold on to our anger and our rage and be okay. We can't spit and curse and scream and rage at the God of the universe, because that's how we die. Instead, we have to realize that it's better to admit our guilt. It's better that we realize that we've been caught. It's better that we take a long look at ourselves and to realize that we could never deserve forgiveness. And then we have to accept it. And that's the hardest part sometimes, isn't it? Accepting forgiveness. But I promise you, that's just as important as anything else, because that's the way to life. And you don't have to scream or cry or rage anymore as if that's your only option, because there are